25 years, Donald Pell has been reshaping landscapes throughout the US Mid-Atlantic. The focus of his work is to develop places that entice people to explore and engage the emotive landscape. His planting designs are composed as impressionist artworks that draw inspiration from nature. Donald Pell's work has won top design awards from the Perennial Plant Association, the Association of Professional Landscape Designers, and most recently, a silver medal in his first ever appearance at the Philadelphia Flower Show. His designs have been finalists in HGTV's Ultimate Outdoor Awards and featured in several publications, including Grow, Garden Design, and Parents Magazine. Situated on a 14-acre farm in Phoenixville, Don's Studio Gardens has become a frequent destination for naturalistic garden design enthusiasts and horticultural educational groups from around the world. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Don to let him tell you more about these gardens and so much more tonight. So Don, if you can join us.
Hello, Amy. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight, and thanks to Jenkins Arboretum for having me. I really wanted to kind of share the story of building a garden, and you know, I run a design and construction business, but I've always been in horticulture, and I grew up working with my family's nursery, and so this was just kind of a natural progression for me. And if there's any kind of message I can leave everyone with tonight, it's that anyone can build a garden, and you don't need to have unlimited resources or extra resources. You could start by easily propagating plants, sharing with friends, collecting seed, and really grow a dynamic garden that's truly satisfying for everyone's life. I just had a question the other night from a client about the ROI of building, you know, a pretty significant garden, and my message always is that, you know, I feel like these gardens are important in my life, you know, to experience the landscape. And I hope that my clients and people I can help understand the process of garden making share that and have that in their life if they want it. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about these dynamic gardens and, you know, how I went about building one. And I started my garden in 2008, the year after I handed over my life savings to acquire a farm for my company out in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. And I had limited to no resources, but I really felt like to become better at horticulture and design, to explore plants more deeply, I needed to put plants in the ground. I needed to do that however I could. And I needed to justify, you know, the expense of doing that. Sorry, I'm a little bit ahead here. So really, this is kind of the oval, the centerpiece of our garden. And the justification was just that. It was, you know, I wanted gardens in my life. I wanted to work with plants and explore plants more deeply. And I wanted to look. And it takes time to really understand what these things will become and have the opportunity to become. And again, much of this was built with limited resources. The other thing I felt very passionately about was, you know, educating my own team. And this is us just walking around in the garden, looking at volunteers from Panicum Virgatum Northwind, which is, you know, the panicums are beautiful native plants that can be very difficult to plant in dynamic gardens because they want to seed out and take over those landscapes. Northwind was introduced by Roy Diblick, a fantastic plantsman out of Illinois. And although it's a beautiful kind of sleek silhouette rather, that plant tends to seed, and the volunteers are not true to form. So we really lose that. And so, you know, that's just me describing what's happened here. You can see a lot of these panicums are flopping. And we really use the garden on a regular basis to inform our team. And I have 2 landscape architects that work alongside me, as well as a team of horticulturists and landscape architects that work in the field. And so this was what we started with. This was our office when we moved in. And you can see there on the right, there's just out of frame, there's a Cornus Kusasatomi and this pyracantha, and that's all that we were left with. And so again, given that I started this garden in 2008, we really were left with limited to no resources to build. And so we had to go about being as economical as possible. And so the turf was just killed off with the herbicide. That's something, you know, we've shied away from, being, you know, kind of conservative about using herbicides, and gone back and forth. We do use chemicals sparingly. When we started this planting, we didn't even use any mulches. We just planted. What we started with were highly competitive plants like this Pycnanthema muticum and Cecilarias. This is autumnalis. Salvias for some color in the spring. I wanted a backdrop to the garden, so Miscanthus giganteus, which is a sterile clone, and so we don't ever see that that plant seed out into the seed out into the garden. And then there's these white willows, Salix alba britanzensis. You can see under the porte cochere, and they were just live stakes I stuck in the ground. I took cuttings off of some shrubs we bought in Minnesota and just jammed them in the soil, and they grew. So very affordable. The Pycnanthemum supports the most array of bees that any plant that's ever been studied. That plant from a plug will grow to a 4-foot diameter in 1 year. So, you know, very easy to cover a lot of real estate when you're working with plants like that. This is the first season. We built this cairn and used Agastache, this hyssop, because of how quickly it can flower. That will flower the first season from seed. So you can direct sow that dormant late season, maybe February, March, or in the middle of winter, whenever the ground's frozen. And this plant, straight Phonoculum, will come up and flower that first season. This hybrid Blue Fortune will flower all summer long. And you can see the panicum top, or Pycnanthemum top left of the screen there, and how dense of a mass that is. And the Paroscas here in the lower corner. This is the Salix alba britanzensis, and you know, can get to be a very rangy shrub, but we just coppice this to the ground to keep it in check, and it's beautiful. This time of the year, it's really kind of glowing with these scarlet stems. So a great kind of wild shrub to work with. And this is the Miscanthus, again, kind of fallen out of fashion with the onset of the kind of natives movement. But this was 4 or 5 quart pots the first year, and this might have been year 2 or 3. So again, in terms of me trying to screen our parking area, this was a fantastic plant for us to work with. It's really fun to watch grow when the ground temperature gets up this plant can grow about 4 feet in 1 week. And you can almost sit there and watch it. The sound that comes through the leaf blades is fantastic. Children love to walk through it. So it's a really fun plant to work with. And the culms of this plant turn like a really beautiful pink. So there's just a lot to really enjoy about this plant. Unfortunately, what we had early on was this plant, this parasitic weed called dodder come in. And so this is the entire front of that garden we had to rip out until we were sure, about a season long, until we were sure it lost its vigor. It tends to, it attaches itself to forbs and lives off those forbs. And so the whole front of our office had to be eradicated, which to me is just fun. You know, I never look at failures as a major problem. I always look at them as an opportunity to learn, and I get really excited by those things. And so Panicum virgatum Shenandoah replaced the Pycnanthemum, and this is Allium millennium, both fantastic plants. This Panicum is a shorter, compact form, and it has the added benefit for design to also be sterile seed. So we don't see this trying to take over the garden. If it was a straight species Panicum, in a few years, this might just take over this planting altogether. However, and this is the summer color of that Panicum, it's really beautiful with these red leaf blades that come in. What we have noticed is a leaf rust coming into some of the Panicums, and unfortunately, we've had to eradicate some of those from our gardens. This planting has been rust-free, and we think it's because of a lot of these Panicums are propagated through the process of tissue culture, and these might have been vegetatively propagated, and so they're staying cleaner. But the jury's still out on that, and we are trialing from New Moon and Kurt Blumel Nurseries some different Panicums to see how aggressively they'll seed into the garden, if we can find a replacement for Shenandoah or not. So again, just a lot of fun for us. It might take several years to really know what these plants are going to do in the future. But you know, while they're here, they're just really enjoyable, delightful plants. That's the Panicum. The following spring, so we didn't cut it back, and you can see the alliums pushing and the Cecillaria pushing a lot of new growth and just really clean. And I love the form of these Panicums the following year. We just planted a ton of allium ambassador, a really big spring bulb. It's like a 6-inch flower across ambassador. So they should be coming up next year through this spent foliage, and I'm really excited about that. Again, even the autumn color here of the alliums, I find to be really beautiful, and something I take delight in. The side of this garden has a lot of Liatris pycnostaca coming up through Spiralis, and the seed heads on this, you know, even in dormancy, is a really beautiful plant. There's that planting going into the autumn. Fritillarias, this is Fritillaria persica, has been a really beautiful plant. We've adopted some of these bulbs in our gardens. I have found the stems, as it's going dormant, to not be as beautiful. They kind of break down as a mushy yellow with bare stems. And so again, the learning curve is now that when we plant these, we're planting them among other foliage that will help disguise some of those sticky stems as they break down in the season. A really beautiful bulb, but again, the context of how they're planted, I think, is really critical. This is the Fritillaria in amongst tulip, Princess Irene with Mascaris, and 2 types of Narcissus tete-a-tetes and Cillian. And we're utilizing bulbs a lot more through our grasses. as an effective ground cover in the early spring to combat cool season weeds in the garden. Many of our layers tend to be warm season plants, and so the bulbs are not only there for their floral show, but really to help cover the ground plane in the spring. And so, after 20, I think we're on 28 years now in business. I started when I was 19. We're really starting to explore spring bulbs as a way to help stabilize the garden. Again, looking through the front of the building, like all old, these old homes, they're set right up on the road. And I really wanted the immersive experience here. We just started building, again, Spiralis Spodiopogon sibiricus is this grass in the lower left, kind of an underused grass. That's eastern exposure. That grass will grow in extremely low light to about 3 feet. Doesn't have the best winter presence, but into the autumn, it's a really exceptionally beautiful plant. Here with the native Rebecca maxima, a beautiful, beautiful plant that does tend to seed freely in the garden. The goldfinches love this plant, and that's my office window there on the right. So I get to enjoy the finches every year. Again, we didn't really have the money for a pathway yet, so the following year gravel pathways went in. I played with a lot of baptisias, and I do tend to mix different selections or cultivars. Here's the straight species Baptisia australis intermingled with Baptisia Carolina Moonlight, and that's something I observed in nature, where we'll see. I've walked on abandoned railroads and seen on one side of the track specific colors of flowers, and on the other side we have a different color of flower. And so I've started doing that more in our own work, where we're mixing cultivars, and I think it has kind of a more interesting feel and look to it. So that's what's happening here. Hakanakloa macra was used for its interesting winter presence. However, we found in these narrow pathways, that's just a big plant to have right on the edge. And it really, this is spring with Camassia, but really what I'm trying to forward is the idea of, this is kind of a big plant. And so this was removed, the Hakanakloa, kind of right in the middle of the screen. Still early spring. By midsummer, this thing wanted to overtake most of that gravel pathway. And then right in where the Camassia is, we have acanthus. This is acanthus, which with its kind of purpley spires. I found this plant growing in the old part of Rome and in Pompeii. Really beautiful plant. The Greeks used to use the foliage of this to adorn their columns, or at least the form of the foliage of this. However, it's a really big plant, and as beautiful as it is, it tends to kind of, if it gets dry, it'll flop a little bit middle of the summer. And so what I found in these narrow beds is it really leaves, if it does that certain years, it really leaves kind of a big void in the middle of the border. And so now where we plant these, we either make sure we have really loamy soil, or we have a lot of planting in the foreground as a way to make sure that the planting still looks desirable. But a really beautiful plant, in my opinion. This is coming down the path, and I really love to plant like this. I love the immersive experience of moving through landscape. We go in and clip just a little bit, but I like folks to be interrupted by plants. I love that experience. I don't want to see the ground plane. I want to see plants. I don't want void space for weeds. Here you can see the Verbena bondariensis, and that kind of seeds freely, and we just edit it as we go. Eryngium yuccifolium, again, a really pollinator-friendly plant, Midwest native. Fantastic in our garden, really competitive against large emergent grasses. We have done a garden up in the mountains in Lehigh County, and it was just pure shale up there. And this plant really wanted to take over in that cultural condition. So the sharp drainage really helps this plant propagate, like most plants we have found. And so the owner still loves this plant, and she just goes through and deadheads it late autumn before it has a chance to sow out in the landscape. But I love the kind of spired umbels on this plant. I think it's exceptionally beautiful. Persicaria, Plexicalia firetail. Again, in very low light conditions, this plant will bloom for about 4 months. And this is an Aster tartaricus jindai. I believe it was found by the Chester County native Rick Dark in the Jindai Gardens in Kyoto. That's a really competitive plant, and we never see weeds come through that plant. I think after about 15 years, we're finally thinking of replacing this with Aster laevis, only to work with a native plant. You know, this has been in a long time, and I've been really happy with it. But I thought we'd substitute it out for Aster laevis. I think they bloom about the same time, which is October. So a really late blooming aster, and equally fantastic plant. And then really this idea of like what happens after the bloom, right? We can see on the lower right, the aster still blooming. Persicaria has kind of shut down here. The first frost must have hit, which is typically what happens. And then the Molinias are those kind of golden yellow grasses that love to color up mid to late October. One of my favorite grasses. This is Molinia cordoba, a fantastic plant. But even the russet color of the Persicaria, I think that's part of the composition. To me, really exceptionally beautiful. I love to go out and look at this. I love to see the evolution of the garden season wide. And the Cornus satomi, one of the few plants that we left in the garden that I inherited, really exceptionally beautiful autumn color. And again, the verbena kind of seeds around, and we just edit that as we decide. This is the far west side of the front of the garden, and you can see the big foliage of these silphiums. I grow 4 different types of silphium: moroi, Laciniata perfoliatum. This is Terebinthinaceum. Beautiful, big architectural foliage and strong, tall stems. If you see this in the prairies in the Midwest, it's maybe only 4 or 5 feet tall. In our garden, it can reach 7 to 8 feet. Beautiful plant. It is highly competitive and wants to seed around. And so, again, it's kind of artistic license. This is not a truly sustainable garden. If we were to leave this, this plant would seed around and probably want to take over much of the garden. But I love it so much. We just go in and cut some of the seed heads off before they start to sow into the garden. Beautiful yellow flower, compass plant, this one's prairie dock. Beautiful plant. We just put in some kind of panels with flagstone here again, and typically we let the verbena kind of sow right through the spaces. So you're walking through plantings. Here our lawn crew decided to weed whack out the verbena, but next year it'll sow back in and we'll have more verbena. And it's a really nice plant in my opinion. Just to kind of, it's an annual that will sow freely from season to season. There it is, kind of taking up the pathway, and the prairie dock. And we have pawpaws here. And we've been told for years that they take a long time to start producing fruit. These are 3 of our native pawpaws, and we've had bumper crops maybe 8 years in of pawpaw. I can hardly give them away. We have so many. We tend to freeze them and just eat them right out of the freezer. But a really kind of nice, fun fruit. I haven't made pies or anything yet, but we do have folks who come over from time to time to take some, but we have plenty to spare for sure. The front of that garden, we have a lot of weed pressure from our neighbors, and so I wanted something that would be kind of very showy and very floriferous at the same. I'm sorry, very showy, floriferous, and very competitive at the same time. And so I chose this Coreopsis zagreb, and truth be told, I thought the color was pretty ugly, clashing with the Proscia. This is Proscia filigrane, which is a very upright form of Proscia. But again, what we found later in the season is as that plant goes dormant, it's so beautiful with its black seed heads contrasting with the sprablus and the Molineas. And that's what I'm really looking for all the time. The flower tends to be so ephemeral. I think often when we're starting to garden and learn about gardens, we're kind of obsessed with the flower, the color, the form of the flower. But what I'm really after is the evolution of the plantings and the novel plant communities and how we can compose them for this character. I love the russet color of the Spodiopogon and this rich orangey yellow or golden color of the Molinia with this black. And then even with the silver stems of this Proscia, I think this is exceptionally beautiful. And again, like I said, I thought it was pretty ugly in flower actually, but when we get to this winter, I think it's beautiful. So Proscias, these are subshrubs. They're not truly perennial. They're not truly shrubby. But what we have found in more mesic soils is that they really need an underplanting. And here you can see how much weed pressure is kind of growing under these plants. We had a lot of ground ivy, oxalis, other spring or cool season weeds. And so we really worked to try to understand, this is it in flower, and yet you can still see here some Asclepias, Serratia growing out of the side, which I always find to be perfectly acceptable, our common milkweed. But we did try a couple plants like alliums, like muscari, and which are cool season perennials, to try to create cool season layers between the shrubs. And what we really found was it seemed to hold too much moisture around these shrubs, and some of them started rotting. And so what I really think is this is just not a very appropriate plant in more mesic soils. And really sharply drained soils, I think these are more effective. They're beautiful plants, but again, it's more or less fallen off our radar in terms of plants for our plant schedules for sure. And again, looking at the autumn color here, this is another Molinia called Coral Forester. The foreground of that is Calamagrostis Coral Forester, and the Catinus obovatus, our native smoke tree. I think it's just beautiful. It's autumn color. A lot of pinks come out of it in the foreground of those pawpaws, and I think that's a really beautiful plant. And I just thought I'd throw this slide in. This was off to the west in an area that will develop as prairie, and it was full of weeds, this area, and dead shrubs. This is our native black willow. There was a lot of dead foliage in there. And this is kind of what we typically do when we go through a property for the first time. We do an inventory and we try to think about, what are the existing assets that are on a property? And these are perfectly beautiful black willows. So, after years of staring at these things, we finally ran out there when it was dry with a lawnmower and cut everything away and went in and pruned these. They were really kind of rough looking plants, but in about 40 minutes, we cleaned them out. And I think there's a great opportunity now to kind of plant. This is kind of the edge of a wetland. You can see the cattails off to the right, but I think they're gorgeous billowy shrubs or small trees. And, and always worth, I think, trying to think about what what existing inventory you already have on a property. So moving around the patio, we have these beautiful thalectrums. I love to put these in windows because of the scaffolded foliage. This is our the Thalectrum rotrubrianum. However, we do see it sow around the garden pretty freely. You know, this plant can be as tall as 7 feet. We've even had a client send us a photo of this. I swear it was about 9 feet tall or better. But typically we see this about 6 or 7 feet. It's very easy to look through. However, it's become really significant to watch this plant sow around and train our gardeners that if we do put this in gardens, they need to look out for spontaneous seedlings, because it can really disrupt the composition that we plan out for a garden and be overly competitive. But look at these stems. I mean, they're just really beautiful, this smoky purple color. I love them. And then just, you know, looking through the garden, you can see how much foliage we have looking out of the windows. This is right in the middle of the screen is Rus tafina laciniata, which, you know, will require some pruning, but exceptionally beautiful. And if, you know, you just open these plants up, really easy to look out and through the garden. This is coming around the side. And again, kind of a chance find on my part. This is Euphorbia palustris with the gold bracts and Amsonia tabernaemontana illustris. And they look really beautiful together, in my opinion. I love these blue flowers with the gold bracts. The Eryngium can get kind of, or Euphorbia rather, can get kind of rangy. And there's some Baptisia minor purple smoke blooming next to it a little later. But this color composition I think is really nice. That's the palustris coloring up with these kind of coral colored stems in the autumn as the Amsonias go to this lemony yellow. I think that's really nice. Kind of big plants. Moving down the slope, again, I love the Molinias. This is a smaller form Molinia Hildebrandt with Astrantia major Roma. This plant came out of Pete Adolph's garden. Really delightful. This is Roma with some geranium carmina and sanguinium, and really nice. And in this lower corner, you can actually see some Rebeckia. And again, around the side of this planting, there's Rebeckia fulgida, which is a really nice plant. However, it does really want to sow freely. And if you were to leave this Rebeckia, as nice as it is, it would probably overtake this whole planting. And so editing is really important, and it's fun too, because you can move those plants to different parts of the garden. You can give them away, or, you know, you can put them on your compost pile, which we tend to do. Stachy's humolo, also an out-off introduction in amongst this white oak. It can take a surprisingly good amount of low light. That plant also is a fantastic ground cover in that it tends to be very cool season and even be almost evergreen right through the winter. And so even in these lower light conditions under deciduous canopy, they're photosynthesizing through the winter and able to withstand kind of the deep shade and still put on a lot of color in the late spring. This is Persicaria amplexicali rosea, and it kind of has a two-tone effect to it. And I really doesn't bloom as long as Firetail, but a really nice, a nice find. We found this at a digging dog nursery in California. I think Glover in Long Island also produces it. We've started propagating it now as well. And this is the winter landscape. That's the Hildebrandt in full flower, middle of the winter with the Tessellaria autumnalis. And I think that looks pretty good. Not to mention the oak. You know, the white oaks tend to hold their foliage in the winter. I'm a big fan of that. We have a bowl, you know, just for some annual interest. And so we're always cutting out of the garden. It's typically just filled with water. And we float whatever, you know, especially when we have company. I love to just put quick bouquets together. This is something I really stole from Chanticleer. Not to give a plug for a separate arboretum, but Chanticleer is a little bowl of water on the side porch, and they always float flowers. And I thought, oh God, I have the perfect bowl for that. And so we've been doing that as well. So really fun, little nuance to the garden. And again, you saw the photo of all the shrubbery in the windows, and this is really the reason why I do that. I want that garden to come in the windows. The Electrum, I want that flower and that foliage in the window. Here on some Amelanchier, we have a cardinal, and I always put aronias. This is Aronia, our native Aronia arborefolia, around window, because the chokeberry, like clockwork, the eastern bluebird comes in every February to our garden, and for about 2 weeks, we're just staring at them, feasting on these chokeberries. And I get so excited. It's like the highlight of my year, truly, to have all these bluebirds come in to our windows. Even these starlings on the roofs. This is right out of our kitchen in the office, where we tend to do a lot of drafting and sketching. There's a lot of light in that part of the office. And I can't get enough of, last year they were all over these roofs. So really fun opportunity. Looking down into the kind of southwest slope, this is the view of the central garden and the oval. We use a lot of salvias for color. This is Blue Hill mixed in with Nephofia Echo Mango, which is out of Stonehouse Nursery. Our native Monarda bradburyiana is a favorite, really beautiful, delightful plant. Again, looking into the oval, a lot of cool season color here. Our native iris fulva, which I always think is tougher to mix with the color, but it's such a beautiful plant. It does want to sow around kind of freely. It's considered a wetland plant, although this is kind of on an upland slope and still, right on the edge of this white oak. This plant does want to sow around freely, so it does require some editing, but a really beautiful plant. And moving down through the paths, even these millennias, I think, are such an important part of the character of the experience of moving through the garden, in that, you're always going to brush up against that efflorescence. And I just love that. I want to be interrupted by plants. I want my guests to be interrupted by plants. I want them to be immersed in these dense, dynamic plantings. This is Amsonia Tabernae Montana Blue Ice, next to Vernonia lettermani, and of course the salvias and baptisias. And here, top left, you can see Phlomis tuberosa, a really beautiful plant, kind of looking into our central oval here, the planting. Achillea has been a favorite, really cool season, even in kind of richer soils. They do very well. They're pretty drought tolerant. They can take some low light as well. I've found our native millefolium growing up in mountains before, in pretty good amount of low light. And then our oval was kind of planted with these alliums. This is Purple Sensation, one of the more affordable of the big alliums. And what I really found was, I thought it was really, again, kind of ugly. If you look down at the base, it's really grubby looking, right as these things are in full flower. And I think I skipped a slide here, but I'll get back to that. But again, here's the yarrow in full flower. This is Coronation Gold with Guiam totally tangerine and Salvia wasui. And I thought this was a good find by me, this color composition, only to do some reading on these plants, on the Guiam in particular, and it said they partnered great with Salvia and Achillea. So I guess I wasn't the first to that game, but really fun color composition in my opinion. And we did the Philadelphia Flower Show a few years ago, and I thought we could get Rhododendron calendaluceum, the flame azalea, to bloom, because they only bloom for about a week during the week of the show, and we pulled that off. But this is flame azalea. Deer do tend to browse them. They're native to the Blue Ridge Mountains and Smoky Mountains, but they grow perfectly well here. For some reason, the deer haven't found them in our garden yet, but a really nice orange in the mid-spring. And then, looking through this low Brutal Lua, this is Blonde Ambition, which is provenance from the Southwest we have found, and not that reliable, but when it works, it's really a beautiful plant. And so we've been using that more, in our own work and experimenting with it. And I use it sparingly in other folks' gardens, in our design work, because of its reliability. However, we found it growing right on top of compacted gravel, and it looked great. So I think it just wants extreme dry, doesn't want much water at all. And down below it, you can see just kind of finishing up flowering is kind of a rare Nepeta. This is Nepeta siberica. And I saw this at Battery Park Conservancy for the first time and thought it was so beautiful, very upright form. And so we grew it, started taking cuttings for our nursery, and found that the voles love this plant. We're on a 14-acre farm, have a lot of vole pressure, and the voles almost completely knocked out 2 blocks we had planted, and even ate right through the bottom of the containers in the nursery and ate the roots right out of all these plants. Again, kind of gave us another opportunity to explore, but I really love this plant, and in Battery Park Conservancy, it looked great. Looking into the oval, some eupatoriums with sanguisorbas. These are great going into the early summer. However, we found the dubiums are, again, very competitive for a garden like this and want to outcompete a lot of what's happening in the garden. This is our native dubium with Monarda fistulosa. And again, I really like this color composition, but both of these plants, in the kind of very intermingled garden we have in the middle, are just too competitive. And so we've taken out the Monarda. We're going to start taking out the eupatorium and sub the eupatorium for a hybrid called Phantom. This is Phantom on the left. It's a little smaller. Dubium on the right, but the dubium truly wants to take over and sow into the garden everywhere. Down below is Scutellaria and Canna, right in the middle of the screen. Also a beautiful native plant, beautiful crystal blue flowers in the middle of the summer. But that's another plant we found in looking at other public projects as well. It just wants to take over, it wants to sow into everything. And so finding equally competitive natures of plants is going to be really important in a dynamic planting like this. You could see the Amsonia hubrechtii kind of right in the middle of the screen. And if it were just plants like that, maybe some more competitive emergent grasses, they would work really well together. But if you have plants like Spiralis on the side or some of these smaller forbs, these plants, the Scutellaria and the Eupatorium dubium, really want to outcompete those plants. And again, we're moving the Eupatorium dubium to an established wetland. We don't even really have to plant it. We just dig the clump and set it on the ground, and it roots itself in, which is a nice benefit of these highly competitive plants. But in this garden, it's just, it's kind of out of balance, so to speak. We did replace some plantings, the Scutellaria, namely, with these Achillea. This is terracotta, and some Veronicastrums that went dormant early in the season, so we cut them back. This is Veronicastrum fascination, and they've been a pretty darn good partner together, in terms of overlapping bloom times. I think they're really showy. In the foreground, where that Scutellaria was, some Schizocarum standing ovation with Calamintha nepeta, and really beautiful plants. And this is kind of the upper edge of that slope with the millennias kind of planted more openly than the drifts we had in amongst Eupatorium Palestinium, which is dormant here. And I just think that's really beautiful. If you stand just to the left of this, where this photo was taken, those millennias really frame a view into the central garden beautifully. And that's the central oval down below, and kind of the autumn landscape coming on, and visitors that we always have. We always have deer come to the garden. Here's a little kit fox that came to visit the other day. So the allium got a little out of order, but this is my daughter standing among some of that allium. And again, what I was trying to point out here was it really does get kind of grubby, the foliage down the bottom. And what I discovered one day was how beautiful, and this was in the Pinelands in New Jersey, driving one day, and I thought, oh God, this spent foliage is so beautiful the following year, and amongst this fresh young green foliage. And I didn't even realize that's why I love this shot. I pulled over on the side of the road and took this just kind of in an odd place. The fog was coming up as I was coming home from the beach, just outside of Long Beach Island one day. And when I looked at the photo later, I realized it was really, I think, last year's dead foliage, this Andropogon, looks like Andropogon virginicus, that I thought was so interesting. And so it gave me an opportunity to kind of play with hiding some of the foliage of the allium. And I don't think I'm there yet with this. You know, I think it needs some layers of cool season grasses intermingled to achieve some more lush green look to it. But I think it's really interesting planting like this. It clearly, to me, makes the tattered foliage of the alliums less obvious. And I think this is really fun. I love, you can see the calamagrostis in the background still up. This is midwinter or mid-spring rather. And I just love that foliage of these grasses. And I tend to leave a lot of these up late into the season. The phloem is coming in the central of the oval. Again, I think this is a really beautiful plant with its world foliage. This is Stachys officinalis in amongst Veronicastrum lavender towers. And I believe this is Hemerocallis Cherokee Chief, which I don't work a lot with the Hemerocallis because I think they look so tattered when the foliage is spent, but used sparingly. I really like the red in amongst all these purples. I think that's really, really interesting. We have seen the deer browse them, but the more intermingled these tend to be, the less pressure we see on them. So that I think that's been a really fun color to add to our compositions. Of course, always the cone flowers are fun to play with. And in the back here is on the right, Arnoglossum artripifolia. That's a really beautiful plant we found out of the Midwest. I was so taken by it. I saw it in the Schulenburg Prairie. And Alex Betts was with me, the president of Kurt Blumel. He was the grandson of Kurt. And Alex said, oh, I think my granddad has some of that. So he sent me some of this Arnoglossum. And I loved it. However, we really, this is it cut back, and you can see all that foliage just seeding in everywhere in the garden. So again, not a good a combination of plants. And so we've moved some of the Arnoglossum into the edge of our woodlands, and we're going to watch and see how it does there. But as interesting as I found this plant to be, really highly competitive, aggressive plant. So not something we're going to retain in our garden for sure. The Sophia Schizocarms, rather, this is a little blue stem, and the only one I've used with success in our heavy clay soils is Standing Ovation. Almost all the other ones I've used tend to flop a lot. This is it with Echinops and Rudbeckias. This has been a fun find, the Agastache Purple Haze in amongst Veronicastrum. And the Veronicastrum has gone dormant early in the year. And we've had clients always want to cut this back or think it's dead. but in dry years, just goes dormant. And yet I love this. I think the dormant spires coming through the purple agastache, especially with the backdrop of calamagrostis, is really, really beautiful. And so this is a midsummer shot and maybe late summer. And I just find this to be as beautiful as any flower in season or anything to look at in our garden. I'm really delighted by what this looks like. Rudbeckia grandiflora is a native we didn't have a lot of experience with, and I think I only saw this in one of Delito's fields, in one of their trial fields. This one's called Sundance, a really beautiful native plant, intermingled here with Rudbeckia triloba. And I just love this plant. We get some red on it here on the tips of the corolla as the season progresses. And, you know, that's what I've done here. I've mixed two yellows, and yellow I always struggle with in the garden, but I find when you just use different hues of yellow, this is actually from my home garden. This Helianthus microcephalus, which I really love, in amongst this Rudbeckia, this is Rudbeckia fulgida. I think these are, that actually might be Goldstrom. I think these are really fun together to just having these different saturations of yellow. So that's just the fun aside. And here's the Rudbeckia Goldstrom or Rudbeckia grandiflora midwinter. And so those seed heads really stay together and are really pronounced. And I love this. We've been collecting some seed off it to grow for ourselves. It is a seed strain, so should grow true to form from the seed. But you know, I love having this in our garden. You can see some of the echinacea in the background with snow on it. And I'm always out in the winter garden, and I'm, you know, we're always thinking about that for people as well. You know, what do these spaces look like in the middle of the winter? And our native Salvia azura. This has been a fun find as well. A couple of years ago, I don't think I'd ever seen this anywhere. We just ordered it from one of our wholesalers, and might have been Blumel's. And this was a really fun find. Kind of used it sparingly here, but we're going to be adding more of this to the garden. It takes a fair amount of drought, and so we're using it on a site that's just pure bedrock now, and I'm excited to see how that's going to work out for us. And then again, just I know we're kind of running on time here, but thinking about the competitive nature, you know, here's this Silphium again, flopping a little and kind of crushing down some of the alliums. And so we're really having, and this could have been a seedling, one of these Silphiums, we really need to edit the gardens. That's, I always say that the gardeners become the designers after time. You know, it's really critical that you have either a homeowner that's hands-on and decides what the evolution of these spaces will become, or a sophisticated garden team. But one must look and really decide, you know, what's the intention of these spaces. We were just at a large public garden out in Delaware. And, you know, there was a lot of resources put into that garden, and there's plants sowing around and killing other plants. And, you know, from my perspective, it just doesn't seem like it's being managed the way the designer intended it to. And they're losing a lot of the, you know, they could lose a lot of the species and composition that are there if it doesn't get handled in time. And so this, again, our garden is a great opportunity to have our gardeners in and talk to them about what they're seeing and what opportunities they might have in the garden. And then the benefit as well, and what I'm really looking for is this native kind of or natural intermingling. This is a geranium I really love, Lossiovianum. Kind of tough to find. We bought these from Holland. And I love how in time, as the grasses kind of really start to take over, this geranium that's typically in a garden situation, kind of a neat little clump, starts to become more rangy and elongated and elegant. And that's what I'm really looking for. I don't want these plants to look like individual little species. I want them to start to naturalize. And this, this might not appeal to everyone, but this is like one of my favorite moments in the garden, seeing this plant do what it would probably do in nature. And the forbs are really critical to hold space early on when there's fire and until the grasses kind of start to dominate. And this is part of that succession that you would have in nature. Of course, these are novel plant communities. They're not all from the same place. They're certainly not all native. But this is what I'm looking for when I design gardens. And even here, the allium in amongst millennias, I don't need them to be all perfectly situated in their own neat boxes. I want them to intermingle and cohabitate. And I find this really delightful. So I'll get through the next little slides kind of quickly because I know we're running out of time. But some fun plants we've worked with: Calamagrostis, Chejudo, not really on the radar of a lot of folks from what we've seen yet. Here it is coloring up. I found this to be really beautiful. And then on the left here, you saw year 3, it started flopping. So that's the jury's still out for us on that plant. We moved it to some other spaces. On the right, this was the other spot where we had Nepenthes iberica, and the voles just totally dominated this area. However, becoming friendly with gardeners, you learn a lot. And Bree Arthur sent me some seed, and we just direct sowed some poppies and arugula, mustard green in here, in amongst some Amsonia rigida that some woman who toured our garden sent me, which was a really thoughtful gift. She sent me seed. I'd never heard of that selection, and we grew it, and now this has Amsonia growing in it. But we're playing with this Calamagrostis. I'm excited to see it. Here's straight species, Cabernet Montana. That's it coloring up. A lot of pinks and scarlets in the foliage. Really nice. The panicums that were seed strains flopping all over, they'd been removed, and kind of a new planting done in that location. Oops. Physosthesia, again, I don't love the stems, and so we planted it in amongst some new plantings of the Chejudo and a different location to see if kind of a drier location might keep that plant a little more upright. Another garden that really was overtaken with weeds. We did not use a herbicide to kind of sterilize this area early on, and learned the hard way that there was a lot of weed seed in this area. And so, and here's some ground ivy kind of colonizing through the area, and some Bouteloua that was flopping in these richer soils. And so we just, again, it's just an opportunity. And this is what gardening is. To me, and hopefully to many of you, it's an exploration and a lifestyle. And it's not about building something and being done. It's the joy of the experience. And even if you're weeding, you're out listening to the birds, learning about the plants, and seeing things from day to day. And this garden is really exciting. And we brought gardeners in here who really want to learn about plants in a new way. There's even some carex that may be laxicomas we found in our back slope, just growing in the full sun. We added to this planting, and I'm really excited to learn limonium and just a host of different plants we haven't really worked with before. And so we're always trying to explore more. Some carex in our woodland, in amongst Huikera caramel. And, I don't cut those sedges back. This is looking into the winter landscape, and I think this is really fun. It's not finished. We're just playing. Hellebores are rotting. We threw down gravel. They started seeding everywhere. They started growing. This is Lamium orvala from Turkey and Italy on the right. Trillium lutea. I believe this is from the Carolinas. It's a beautiful, beautiful trillium. We're starting to grow a lot of this ourselves. Different epimediums like pink champagne, amber queen. This is amber queen and epimedium Freundleiten mixed together, and some bladder campion, which is a native plant that just showed up, started seeding into the garden, and we just edited a little bit. Not the best photo, we're a little weedy here, but I did want to show off this geranium called Geranium phaeum. We also bought this in from Holland. And it's a really beautiful, beautiful plant with great foliage. It greens up very early in the season. It does like even moisture, it will go dormant. Again, if you throw gravel around on the ground, it will start seeding freely into the gravel. Here we have it in amongst this native Iris cristata and blocks of Astobe chinensis purple candles. This is it going dormant. Carex divulsa, kind of a beast of a plant that likes sunny, wet areas, and we put it in dry shade to try to tame it down, but it still gets pretty large. This is a Salvia coami, which is a woodland salvia. I started pairing this with the pink chelone, and they overlap in a really nice plant. But this is the plant that looked terrible for 3 years in our garden. And again, this is about the experience. I can't talk about that enough. You know, I was ready to remove this plant from our garden, and this might be year 3, and it finally started looking like something. And I really appreciated the buttery yellow flowers in this plant. And again, looking at kind of oddball plants, this is a really vasy form of Carex called Carex alata. And I just love this plant. I don't see it used almost ever. And I mean, I don't think I've ever, maybe in a Wolfgang Oehmer garden, perhaps, but I love the form of this plant. I think it's really beautiful. And it has black inflorescence in the late spring. So really fun with little yellow anthers on it. So a fun plant. And that's really kind of the evolution of what we're doing in our garden. You know, it's really to explore plants and spaces and the beautiful seasonality of planting and plant compositions. And that's it. That's just really what I wanted to share with you all. Thank you. Oop. Thank you, Amy.
To fully unshare your screen, we can come back together and we can take some questions. So for those of you who are still with us out there, if you guys want to put your questions in the Q&A box, we will be able to take those now. All right. Are you stuck on your screen share?
Yeah, I am.
We can just leave it.
Yeah,
That's
sorry
okay.
about that.
That's okay.
That's
So not to completely put you on the spot with this first question, Don, but what our first person said that they said they can't take notes because the photos are so gorgeous. Would you have a plant list or be able to get a plant list from your lecture? Is that something we could?
Yeah, I could probably share something that was you know, the plants we have in our garden for sure. We actually have our gardeners make those lists just to learn as they're working here. So we have some lists for sure.
Okay, great.
All right.
And now my cat is going to make a presence.
Yeah.
What was the big plant that is pink and looks like a water lily? Let's see, this is going to be a fun test. Large plant.
It's like a water lily. It might have been Anemone robotissima, perhaps. Someone can look that up and see if that's what they were thinking. It looks like a water lily. That's all I could think.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Someone was asking, do you do much deadheading in the garden?
We're trying to reduce seeding, perhaps. But people ask when to prune. That's a very subjective thing, and I always feel like if it really looks grubby to you, then prune. But there's a great evolution that happens with these plants as well. I love to share the story about a woman who came. She had a garden out on the coast she wanted us to work on for her, and she was saying how ugly she thought a stilby was after it was done blooming. And I said, I agree with you. Although I've had people in my office say, oh, they really like that look. But if you wait longer in the season, that kind of washed out green spent flower turns to a cocoa color and looks fantastic all winter. So, Wolfgang said something about the greatest threat to the garden is the gardener. And I think that can be true. That was Wolfgang Irma, who I didn't know. I met once or twice, but I was a huge fan of his work and worked with one of his dear friends for years. And I think we just need to slow down and stop feeling like you need to be in the garden constantly, dabbling. Just enjoy it and learn from it. And, before you just kind of get in there and feel like there's all these rules you need to learn by, the more you are kind of relaxed in the garden, you can make your own rules. And I think that's really important. So there are times I do deadheading, but I like to enjoy the garden and not be working in it constantly. So just relax, maybe might be my recommendation.
Linda wants to know more about your pawpaws. You mentioned that your pawpaws produce a lot of fruit. She's asking, where are they positioned? Are they in the sun or the shade? She has pawpaws that haven't produced anything, and she's in the eastern shore of Maryland.
Yeah, well, you definitely need a couple to help. The cross-pollination helps, right? Mine are in full sun. They really get blasted from the west, so a lot of light for sure, and they're definitely cross-pollinating. So I'm pretty hands off with over fertilization. We use dry humates. Sometimes we'll give a mineral release early when we plant. We tend to use a 50-50 mix of raw wood chips and leaf compost when we plant woody plants. I don't like annual mulching. I just like the leaf litter to be, what's mulching those gardens. So that's kind of our neglectful management. It's not that it's totally neglectful. I think the humates could really help. And in more xeric soils, like sandy soils, they may need some more kind of late winter mineral releases to help those plants along. I don't think of those as coastal plain plants, more kind of Piedmont. And so, might not be as rich as those plants want, but it may just be a cross-pollination issue. And again, where I find those in the wild, and I find those all over in the wild, they grow in dense woodlands as understory, and we don't see fruit on those often, so I think they're fruiting much better as an edge plant or out in the sun for sure.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you for sharing that information. Thinking back in your presentation to some of the panicums that you showed, would you be able to talk a little bit about which species they were again?
Yeah, Shenandoah was the one we historically used because, again, it has sterile seed and it doesn't want to take over a garden. If it's in kind of a more naturalized place, I think Brigadum, just the species, is a beautiful plant. You're going to get a lot of variation out of there. Northwind is beautiful. It's a beautiful kind of upright form. However, it seeds aggressively here. I was working on a garden down in Memphis, Tennessee, and they don't have that plant seed out at all down there. So again, this is all very regional. and we're growing one called squall now and rubra to trial those, but I don't really know much about those yet. So they're the ones we've been playing with at this. Shenandoah, it's hard to recommend that because of all the rust we're seeing on it, for sure. We're definitely not using it in new gardens at all.
Mhm. So kind of dovetailing from disease management into pest management. Someone has a question about, you mentioned in the presentation a little bit of a struggle with deer. What is your recommendation for the average homeowner in pest management?
Yeah, I mean, we have deer in our garden all the time. And so the one plant that's almost crazy that I have, I grew some hosta halcyon because I wanted to play with that kind of powdery blue small hosta, which I almost never use in gardens. But if you're using a lot of plants from the mint family, the onion family, if you're layering a lot of grasses, I find that the deer are not as inclined to move into emergent grass habitats. There are plenty of plants, our garden is lousy with plants that the deer don't eat. Amsonias they never touch. I haven't seen them eat the guiums. Again, from any of the mints, pycnanthemums, monardas, there's just so much that they don't go after. I just think it's a little trial and error for folks. I mean, we've certainly tried plants that have been on the deer don't eat list and they've eaten. So I'm not trying to say it's completely simple, but they bed right down in my Millennias. We found them right in the middle of the garden this year. And there's plenty around, they're just not eating. So I think just explore more. You'll certainly find a lot that they're not eating. And then just more of those, don't feel like you need 100 varieties. Although our garden has, we probably have well over 100. There's just so much they won't eat. And grasses, I don't know if whoever asked the question is a fan of grasses, but they're certainly not eating most of the grasses in the garden that we use.
True, most definitely. And we
Yeah.
have in our upcoming magazine for Jenkins that's coming out our winter spring 2023, we do have an article in there about plants that are native that deer, we're finding that deer are not munching on. So that can be another resource for folks once that hits the presses here soon.
Yeah,
Sounds like
sure.
while you have human interventions in your garden and you have your gardeners looking and working, you might not do a ton of cleanup, but Bridget's asking how much cleanup do you do in spring and when do you usually time that?
Sure. Again, it's kind of it tends not to be a wholesale cleanup. We go and we clip some things back as they need to be clipped back. I showed Persicaria. That plant hates mulch. It does not push new foliage until late in the season. And so you can get a lot of cool, and they're big rhizomes that make up that plant. And so if you mulch it, you'll rot the rhizomes most likely. If you, strip away the foliage, you're going to get a lot of cool season weeds around it. So the things we found is just to leave the duff from that plant in place. That is nature doing what it wants to do. It's self-mulching. If you find it to be unsightly, maybe just clip it back so it's a little finer. But those plants want to live in their own biomass. And so we clip back what looks bad when it looks bad. So we do some of that in the midsummer. We do some of that with bulbs late spring. We do some of it in the autumn, and we do some of it late winter or early spring even, So again, again, I think that's part of, if you're truly want to experience the joy of the garden, don't feel like you need to go in and knock it all down. Some plants might flop their first year or two until they grow big enough roots to sustain some of these big emergent plants. And so I think the more you can kind of be, relaxed and kind of look at the garden and try to learn from seeing, I think the better you will become at horticulture.
Mhm. Great. April has a shady spot with ferns, and she's asking for suggestions for some color to mix in. I wanted to see what you thought.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much from our native phlox, the Verticata, or stolonifera, to iris, and the geraniums are a wonderful family. Maculatum is a native. The geranium Cataviense or Macarizum are wonderful, and we never see deer browse those. Epimediums are wonderful in dry shade, and once they're established, I mean, I've seen those under trees that fell down, and those plants lived very well in full sun even. We have those lamiums and hellebores. Chelone does very well in pretty low light. The Astrantia can take a fair amount of low light. Our native Pachyra does very well, tends to like even moisture to wet areas, but it can take a fair amount of shade and sows pretty aggressively in a landscape as well. So that can be, especially wetter landscape. So that can be a very nice plant to have sow freely through your garden. I don't know, April. There's a lot of plants to explore. For sure the persicarias, which are not native, but for midsummer color, I don't know how you can only not think about a plant like that. It's so beautiful. Yeah, so I think there's a lot out there to try out for sure.
Mm-hmm. Maybe figuring out how aggressive that fern is that you have.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, some of those can need pretty specific cultural conditions, and we're always playing with different ferns for sure. They're beautiful plants, of course.
Mm-hmm. So the last question has us coming back to Panicum Shenandoah, and mentioning that you had said that tissue culture might have caused the rust. Have you seen this elsewhere other than your garden, and why do you think it might be happening with the tissue culture?
Well, that was actually observational from Alex Batts, who Alex is a fine nursery person. His nursery, I believe, is vegetatively propagating that, and that's something that we've noticed. Now, my friend James Brown, who owns New Moon, told me he's propagating that vegetatively, and we saw some rust come in on some plants I bought from him. So, and that's not a slight on James. James is a very thoughtful, incredibly professional nursery person, but so I'm not sure it's tissue culture. That was something observational that Alex mentioned to me, and I'm on the fence about if that's really what's happening or not. But we've seen that panicum, that rust in panicum all over the place. Okay. Yeah. Not in our own work, but in gardens everywhere. So it's unfortunate because it's such a beautiful plant. Really.
Mm-hmm. All right. Anyone else? Last questions for Don. Thank you so much for answering all of those. That was great.
Sure.
So while we wait and see if there's a final question, those of you who are still with us, I just wanted to mention that our next third Thursday lecture will be in January 2023. The topic is the scientific benefit of trees for livable and sustainable communities. And that's with a staff member from the Morton Arboretum. So hopefully you guys will register for that and join us for that in January. And I think that is it for us tonight. Don, thank you so much for being with us
Right.
and taking your time
Amy,
and
thank
sharing your
you.
expertise. All right. And
Yeah,
hopefully
thank
we'll
you. Thank you for everyone.